work effectively. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Our next witness is from the New York Library Association.
I'm a witness? Was I subpoenaed?
That's what it said on the piece of paper.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting us to speak today about the impact of state funding cuts on library services and actions the legislature can take to address the future needs of libraries. Earlier this year, the governor proposed a 7.3% cut in school aid, a 2% cut in municipal aid, and yet libraries were targeted for a 10% cut. Fortunately, the legislature, particularly the Senate, was able to restore $3 million of the proposed $8.45 million cut, for which we are very grateful. Since the 2007-2008 state fiscal year, state funding for libraries has dropped from $102 million to $79 million, or by 23%. So for a couple of years, between 2005 and 2008, funding for libraries actually did increase in the state, and which, again, we were very grateful for. During the same time period when libraries were being cut 23%, funding for schools dropped only by 2%. While school enrollment remained relatively flat at 3.1 million students since 2007, library visits increased from 112 to 117 million between 2007 and 2010, while circulation of materials increased from 147 to 165 million during the same period. There are currently, as Jeff had said, 10 million or more library card holders in New York State. The two essential points that I really want to make is libraries are educational institutions. They are chartered by the Board of Regents, administered by the State Education Department, receive both state and local funding, and serve the educational needs of their communities just like schools do. Yet time after time, we are the last to receive funding increases and the first to receive cuts, and disproportionate cuts at that. What the library community really wants is parity, equity, fairness, call it what you will. We want to be treated the same as schools. The state courts have already recognized libraries as educational institutions. Time has come for the legislature and the governor to follow suit. Secondly, it's both bad public policy and defies the laws of supply and demand to cut funding for a service that the public needs and wants. Library usage, like the need for unemployment insurance, heating assistance, food stamps, job training, increases during tough economic times, like we are experiencing now and probably for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. It does not make sense to cut funding for those support programs nor library services during tough economic times, especially when state aid for library services amounts to less than 0.1% of the entire state budget. Libraries have been, and even more so today, essential to the communities they serve. Libraries are essential to the 37% of the population still without internet access at home and use the free internet access at the library. Libraries are essential to the more than 8% or 750,000 New Yorkers who are unemployed and use the library to search and apply for jobs and public assistance and improve their digital literacy skills. Libraries are essential to the 30,000 high school dropouts annually in the state that use the pre-GED and other pre-employment courses at the library to complete their education and improve their job skills. Libraries are essential to the 200,000 students in the state who enroll in the English as a second language classes at libraries. Libraries are essential. Libraries were created by the philanthropists of the late 18th century to be the universities of the streets for the large majority of the population at the time who did not complete high school or could not afford to go to college. Unfortunately, this role as the universities of the streets is becoming a reality once more as the cost of a higher education has become increasingly unaffordable, even for the middle class, and when many are questioning the value of a traditional four-year degree. I can foresee a time in the near, not too distant future when libraries begin offering accredited educational courses that can be used to attend college or obtain employment. Libraries will provide an alternative path to the American dream for many left behind on Main Street who do not benefit from the excesses on Wall Street. So what can the legislature do, and particularly the Assembly, to meet the future needs of libraries? First, take the lead in supporting libraries and not take a back seat to the Senate in securing restoration of library aid back to 2007 levels. The governor has proposed a 4% increase in school aid next year. The legislature's response should be to treat library aid in the same way. Second, continue to be open-minded and flexible in passing legislation that allows libraries to access other sources of state funding. like adult literacy education, ALE, employment preparation education funds, EPI, universal pre-K, and workforce development funds that can support the services and programs that libraries are providing in their communities. Third, support legislation that allows libraries to partner with other governmental entities, like BOCES, to provide internet access, or to provide flexibility in procurement practices, or in the allocation of library aid. There are several legislative initiatives included in our 2012 legislative priorities that save libraries money or allow existing funds to be allocated more effectively. Fourth, treat libraries the same as schools. Again, whether it's operational or construction funding or minimum standards, professional requirements, libraries are educational institutions and librarians are educators and should be held to the same rigors and levels of accountability and support. If schools are exempt from the MTA payroll tax, then so should libraries. If the legislature passes legislation to exempt schools from the Wicks law, then libraries should be included in that exemption as well. Fifth, broadband access. That's already been mentioned, and high-speed internet connections are essential not only to our libraries and other community anchor institutions like schools, but to the viability of our economy. Since libraries are a key provider of internet access in their communities, a stable funding stream needs to be created through a state universal service fund that supports the broadband deployment, high-speed access to libraries and schools, and digital literacy efforts to bridge the digital divide and expand the number of digitally literate New Yorkers. Assemblyman Palmisano had asked about, where's this funding coming from? And during the Spitzer administration, there was $5 to $10 million allocated 2 years in a row for a state broadband council, of which I am a member still. And I chair the digital literacy committee of that state's broadband council. That money has been spent, and there's been no new reappropriations for broadband deployment and digital literacy and things like that. Recently, the federal government, through its broadband stimulus plan, gave or was awarded the state $9 million to do more broadband deployment, and the New York Library Association was a recipient of about $800,000 of that to do digital literacy training throughout the state. So there is some federal money available through the stimulus funds, but the state needs to create a permanent, ongoing funding stream for broadband deployment, for digital literacy, and for increasing internet access and high-speed capabilities at libraries and community anchor institutions throughout the state. Sixth, according to the state library, there's approximately about $2.5 billion in library construction and renovation needs throughout the state, and yet the state provides only $14 million annually for public library construction funds. A modest increase to perhaps $20 million would definitely be welcome, and would be a boost to the economy. The governor has mentioned several times about saving or solving the state's budget situation. It's not about just cutting in revenue, but it's coming up with a new dynamic. And one way to pump money back into the economy is through construction and renovation. The last time this country went through such a great depression or recession, FDR, former governor of the state, pumped a lot of money into the WPA, which built actually a couple thousand libraries throughout the country. It's not a bad idea to pump some more money into library construction to do the same this time around. And lastly, the legislature and the governor need to recognize and support the library service delivery model in our state. The 73 library systems in our state have been providing shared services, cost sharing, and cooperative initiatives for the past 50 years, which has enabled our libraries to be one of the most cost-effective public services available in almost every community in the state. When state funding for library services are cut, local libraries and their taxpayers have to make up the difference. So instead of punishing us for being so thrifty with our public dollars, state policymakers should use us as a model for how other local public services can be delivered in the most cost-effective manner possible. Again, I want to thank the Assembly, and especially Committee Chair Bob Riley and Assemblyman Palmisano and Roberts for coming from their districts to be here today, to hear us from the library community. It's unfortunate, again, that there's nobody here from New York City. I think that you had asked about what the problems are in terms of getting funding for libraries. I think it's important that the New York City delegation take more of an interest in libraries. Libraries are really important throughout the state, but you only see the visibility from people from Long Island, people from upstate New York. What we need is more interest by the New York City delegation, and here's a good example that there's no one here from New York City. So again, thank you for inviting us, and free to take any questions.
First, thank you for your testimony and some of the suggestions you've laid out in your testimony. We all know that funding is always an issue, and that's always the number one issue, but wanted to ask you, what can the state do from when you're talking to our libraries throughout the state that would help untie your hands from maybe to provide more flexibility, if there's some regulations that, hinder investments in your community because of what the state is often mandates as far as, implementing programs and spending money. Do you see anything that the state can do in addition to providing additional funds that can help untie those hands at the local level and provide more flexibility?
Yes, I mean, we're not overly regulated, but again, for construction purposes, the Wicks law is an impediment for using funds there. We have legislation proposed that would give libraries more flexibility, library systems more flexibility in spending the money that they are currently getting. And, since we've been cut 23% since 2008, a lot of programs are operating at, 20 to 30% less of what they normally be operating on. We like the flexibility to be able to combine those funds together and allow the library systems in their local libraries to determine how that money is spent. So we're looking for more local control of how state aid is being spent, given the fact that our funding has been cut by such a large amount. So give us more flexibility in spending the money that we do have left. And that's one thing where you can be very helpful. Procurement, the procurement laws in the state are really antiquated. A lot of the products that libraries buy are digital format these days. They're online subscriptions, they're e-books. Are e-books considered a service or is it a product? Do you buy an e-book or do you borrow or loan an e-book? And it's our determination that they're products, you actually buy it. And our procurement laws don't reflect that. And so we're looking for flexibility in changing the procurement laws in the state to recognize online digital services or subscriptions as an actual product. So let's update our laws to reflect what libraries are actually purchasing and what a lot of their content is becoming. Again, simple things like allowing libraries to work with BOCES. A lot of examples you have. BOCES are and the RICs, the Regional Information Centers, there's about 9 of them in the state, have very robust internet connections. They go right by libraries, and yet libraries can't tap into those internet connections. Why? Well, because we're not considered educational institutions by the legislature and the governor. So if you allow us to be designated as educational institutions that can be serviced by BOCES, we can bundle our purchases of internet connections together and get a better rate. When you bundle purchases of anything, you're going to get a better discount, a better price, and hopefully a better service. So again, just allowing libraries to work with BOCES, local governments, things like that, again, would go a long way to help reducing expenses and saving taxpayers money.
One more question, and thank you for that. I know you mentioned workforce development and economic development, and I think the thing that struck me is in today's economic climate, that was kind of what I said at the beginning in my opening comments, with more people out of work, people are relying more on the libraries for, preparing for a new job or for workforce training or educational type of components. With Workforce New York, I know Workforce New York is our main workforce development training institution throughout the states and regions. Do you run into those same type of hurdles as far as partnering with them? I know that they do a pretty good job of, from the workforce development side of things, but what can you see where there could be more of a cooperation in that area from the workforce development and, economic development side of things?
Actually, I used to be in economic development in a prior career. I used to work for the city and county's economic development agencies, and I served on a workforce development board. And one good thing would be having a library representative on a workforce development boards. Libraries are in the front lines of helping people find, look for, and get jobs. My personal experience, my older brother, who's 53, blue-collar guy, high school graduate, but doesn't have a clue on how to use the internet. So we took him to the Albany Public Library. They helped him set up an internet account, the whole thing. And because most jobs, that blue-collar, entry-level jobs, all required going online or filling out an online application, whether it was Target, Walmart, Albany Medical Center, every job that he applied for required an online application. Or otherwise, you had to go down and travel to all these different places and fill out an actual application. So I think for all those people, again, who don't have internet access at home, how do you look for a job these days if you don't have that? And the only place you can really go is a public library. And so I think the Department of Labor and our economic development state agencies need to really look at libraries in a different way. Think outside the box. Think outside the traditional view of libraries. Because you go into a library these days and you'll see lots of people online looking for jobs, getting help printing out their resumes or filing for applications for various different things. And there's no recognition by those state agencies of what we do. A good example was Department of Tax and Finance a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. Libraries, public libraries, have been a major distributor of tax forms and paper tax forms. And then one year, to save state money, the State Tax and Finance Office decided to stop sending out, mailing out forms to taxpayers, and told people to go to their libraries to pick up the forms or download them. Well, that put a huge financial burden on libraries, not only to staff and get all these forms out to the individual taxpayers, but also when people ran out of those forms, they printed them off at the library. I think I got average cost, it cost libraries $4,000 to $5,000 extra to be an arm of the State Tax and Finance Department. So again, I think there's like 30 or so one-stop centers. The Department of Labor operates these one-stop centers regionally throughout the state. Well, they only operate 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So if you're working part-time at Walmart and looking to get a permanent job, or you're in school and you want to go on the weekends or at night, these one-stop centers are totally useless to you. So again, here's an opportunity for the Department of Labor and those one-stop centers to team up with libraries to support what they do in the evenings and on the weekends. I mean, they're just natural connections like that. I've asked actually the Department of Labor for a way to survey the unemployed to find out where do they go to look for jobs? What services do they use? Because I'd like to know, from them, how many of the unemployed are actually using libraries. We know from surveying libraries that like 90%, 95% of libraries have helped somebody look for a job in the last year. We know from our side, but it'd be great to get confirmation from the unemployed about where are they going to look for jobs, and to get job assistance. And the Department of Labor could easily survey those people to find out for sure, and we have better information to act on. So there are things that people need to start thinking outside the box. We're in a crisis situation here, and the old way of doing things and the old mindset of doing things just doesn't work, and we all need to start thinking differently. And use the resources that are already available. There's a library in practically every community in this state. There's a building, it's staffed, it has resources, could use more, but why don't we maximize what we already have?
Just one more question that kind of spins off the workforce side of things. As you know, right now, the governor's offices, they're doing the Economic Development Regional Council presentations, and I know I was able to attend one of our local subgroups, and there was a representative from the library systems there. They wanted to come and basically make their voice known that we want to be a partner in this. Have you seen that throughout the state with these economic development councils, and do you see a role, more of a role that libraries could play in that arena?
Again, I think as a frontline service, yes. I mean, libraries are not going to get a $2 million grant to create jobs and things like that. But I think ongoing sustainable funding for libraries to provide frontline services, whether it's job training kinds of things, GED kinds of things, computer digital literacy. I mean, again, there's so much. I think there's such a great demand for training people on how to use computers, the internet, software that's out there that libraries can do. And again, I foresee libraries playing more and more of a role in providing education to all those people in this country who will not be able to afford to go to college as a local resource. So again, I think we need to look outside the box. I think we need to meet with the various players that are out there that are providing job training money, economic development funds, and think about ways libraries can deliver services in their local communities.
And just one last comment. As a former board member of a local Workforce New York, I certainly appreciate your comments. There is some good comments. I think that's something they should really look at the local level as far as that partnership, having that inclusivity and trying to work with the Department of Labor as well on trying to provide more available services within the constraints of what they're trying to do. So thanks for those comments as well.
Sure.
Assemblyman Robert.
Yes, good morning. I was just wondering, you had mentioned FDR and what he did when he was under his administration. What kind of help do the libraries get now from the federal government?
New York State gets about $9 million in federal LSTA funds. That number has been shrinking over time as state funding for libraries has declined. There's a quid pro quo in that federal funding is tied to the amount of state funding. So every time we get cut in state funding, we lose federal funding. And the federal funding is based on population. So as New York's population shrinks in relation to the rest of the country, again, we get hit twice. So we get hit because we're losing state funding, and we get hit because we're losing population relative to the rest of the country. Most of that money, $9 million of it, most of that goes to support the state library. Jeff and his department, the Office of Cultural Education, get the bulk of the money because the state of New York has not funded our state library with its own state dollars for many years now. So they're relying on federal money, which should be going out to libraries in your districts. Instead, it's being sucked up here in Albany to support a state agency, when state funding should be supporting a state agency.
Okay, so New York State, so we trigger what happens from the federal government then?
Yes, every time we cut funding, state funding, we lose federal funding.
All right, thank you.
Michael, thank you for your very candid testimony. I would clarify from my perspective your comments relative to the Senate and Assembly, and that it's the governor, in fact, that has, in recent historical budgets, made the substantial cuts. The tradition of the Assembly is to support those entities and people in need, much more so, it's my experience, in the Senate. And it's very easy for some entities, whether it's the Assembly, Senate, or governor, to make promises, but not come up with the funding. And as you well know, there are political nuances played here. So in the end, I believe that the Assembly has stepped forward and worked to restore libraries. And as I said, we're committed to doing that. That may be a difference of opinion. I don't want to debate it now, but I did want to at least give my opinion of that. Phil mentioned the Economic Development Councils, which I considered a very substantial first step by the governor as far as revitalizing our economy. What representation, if any, did the libraries have on those councils?
As far as I know, none. I mean, these councils were created, to serve the business community, and I don't really know, how anybody got appointed to these economic development councils, so can't speak on that.
Right. I think that was a serious oversight, and I think that we as the library community have to become involved in that. There were hundreds of projects submitted across the state to revitalize our communities, as well as the 10 regional 5-year plans that were developed. And libraries should have been an integral part of that. I know in our capital district region, there are very many technology projects that were put forth, and whether it was the universities, whatever. So we have to make an effort to do something about getting involved with that. Along with that, what was heard by each of the councils across the state was the need to provide mandate relief. And Assemblyman Panisano asked you about that, and you responded with a number of very specific recommendations. What happened with the development councils really at the last minute, even though mandate relief had been identified as an important element in revitalizing our economy, the governor made the decision that would not be part of the 5-year plans, but that his separate mandate relief committee, whatever it's called, I don't know the official name offhand, would take that under advisement and be working on that mandate relief. And I think it's important that the library community be in touch with that group under the Lieutenant Governor to provide mandate relief, because this relief can be real savings for the library. It's one thing that we can do easily, we being both regulatorily and legislatively, to get relief and help us in that. So I recommend that you work on being involved in that along with your libraries. Let me ask you the question which I asked before. Why have we, putting aside the Assembly and the Senate, and I recognize that we have not supported it as strongly as we might have, but what do you identify as the reason for these historical cuts in library aid?
Well, again, I came on board in 2004. The Governor Pataki had cut funding for libraries, and the speaker actually came to our advocacy day. I think it was the only time in my 7 years being here that the speaker came, and at the time it was Sandy Galiff was the chair. And as a result of that connection, the following year, funding for libraries was restored to the previous year, so we went back to $84 million. And then every year between that year and 2008, we had increases in library aid. So, we did have success in both the Senate and the Assembly with folks coming together and agreeing that libraries were a priority for both. And when that happens, then libraries benefit. When one side, when that connection lapsed, that's when libraries started suffering disproportionately, I think. So, again, I think the Assembly has taken steps. I mean, this past year, I just want to commend you as chair that we made a lot of success this year, and especially legislatively. And I think we're headed on the right path. So I'm hoping that this coming year will even be a better year in working with the Assembly to move the library committee or library agenda forward. And I just want to commend your leadership in making that happen. I think that you're setting the right tone. I think this hearing is definitely a great step in the right direction. And the more dialogue, the more listening that happens, the better off libraries will be.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to working with you, the association, with the State Education Department, with the other members of the library community. And I think it's very important that we maintain our contact, especially early on. We don't want to wait till springtime just before the budget, not
Right.
that you haven't been present all the time, and that we come up with a single message, single focus, and work together to get equitable funding. We have been joined by Assemblyman Tom Abenanti.
Thank you, Mr.
Tom, do you have
Chairman.
any questions?
Yes, I do, actually. I hate to be the,
Fine.
if my colleagues already have asked their
Yeah.
questions. That one doesn't want to work, we'll try this one. Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Has there been any impact on libraries from the 2% tax cap that's been imposed by the state?
Good question. I was going to get to that. Actually, yes. Libraries were not actually written into the tax cap legislation, although we are being impacted by it. And we have been fortunate enough to work with the State Controller's Office, legislative staff, the Governor's Office to make sure that the impact of the tax cap has had the least impact possible on libraries, and that has happened to a degree. Unfortunately, though, for those libraries that are funded in large part or in totally by the municipalities or counties, the tax cap has a devastating impact. Example is this recent article about Plattsburgh. The city of Plattsburgh is cutting funding for its city library by $150,000. In Oneida County, you'll hear a lot about this from people in the audience who will come up and testify after me. But you'll find out that those libraries that are funded by the county or the municipality that have their own 2% tax cap, they're going to say, well, I got to fund the police and the fire departments and roads and geez, I don't have any money left over under the 2% tax cap to fund the library. All right, library, you go off and do your own thing and create your own mechanism for funding the library. So you're gonna see a lot of that. Oneida County